This week on Right Now, so you've seen through the lies, but what next? Neuroscientist and author Dr. Christopher Shaw is on the line to talk about the recent uptick in neurological diseases. To watch the full episode, including Food Forest Abundance CEO Jim Gale, filmmaker Todd Harris and Dr. Stephen Malthouse, click onto Ickonic.com to start a free 7-day trial. Dr. Christopher Shaw is a Canadian neuroscientist whose research focuses on Lou Gehrig's disease. Chris did an undergraduate degree in biological sciences at the University of California and then a master's in medical physiology at the Hebrew University and a PhD in neurobiology at the same institution. Chris is the author of over 150 peer-reviewed articles, numerous book chapters and edited books, and has authored 2 books on neurological diseases and 1 on vaccine controversies. Dr. Shaw, thank you so much for joining us. We've just been speaking. We've just been speaking about Uninformed Consent, the film that you've obviously contributed to. So you've written a book on vaccine controversies. What connections have you seen between vaccines, particularly the COVID vaccine, and neurological issues?
Well, so far we've seen a few things in the phase trials that were disturbing, such as the cases of Bell's palsy, such as the a range of neurological symptoms. Many of them were not particularly severe, but the concern when you have any kind of neurological condition is that it's going to develop into something later on that could be quite severe. And I think we're beginning to see the beginning edge of that, where a lot of the things that were assumed to be trivial, for example, myocarditis, various other kinds of things, are not trivial at all. And so when you involve brain inflammation and where you're getting some of these particles into brain, I think you can anticipate that down the road, you're going to have some problems. And that's my main concern.
Is this something that would develop over time within a person, or is it a case of, with your added booster shots on top of that twice a year or whatever, that it can become cumulative?
I think it's going to become cumulative, and I think most neurological disorders that I study, at least Lou Gehrig's disease and some others, and autoimmune diseases which are related in some ways, often take years to develop. And so the concern is, especially now when you're giving it to young children, and you have this interval before they start to experience the symptoms of neurological disorders, that could be very, when it finally catches up with you, it could be quite severe. And that's my primary concern. That is, we're building a wave of neurological conditions that we won't be able to treat, that will pretty much put us in a very very hard place as a society for how to treat or attempt to treat all the injured people.
See, when I speak to yourself, and I've spoke to people like Dr. Peter McCulloch in the past and others that are speaking out, and they're doing it from a point of view of someone needs to say something because this is worrying. There's a worrying trend. Why do you feel that a lot of the medical establishment is kind of almost sitting on its heels a little bit in this and not really speaking out?
I think there's historical trends. I think the way much of the medical establishment is trained is that vaccines cannot possibly do any harm, and therefore that must apply to COVID as well. And that's simply not true. First of all, it's not a traditional vaccine, and it's very different from in the platform and how it's formulated, and kind of so far the level of impacts. But that training carries over. It's almost impossible for many classically trained to think that vaccines can do harm, and it's not true. It's never been true. But it's definitely not true with the COVID vaccines. So you have a kind of institutional refusal to look at things that are happening right in front of their faces.
Have you faced any backlash at all for speaking out? Because it's almost kind of, people, I know a lot of people get attacked for speaking out.
Well, I have been attacked for speaking out, and certainly, my university is not happy with what I say. I should mention to your listeners that I'm on unpaid leave because I wouldn't take the vaccines myself. And it was required, even though I don't see patients and I'm not in a setting where patients come and go. Nevertheless, they made it a requirement that everyone take the jab, and I refuse. So you're speaking to a on leave university professor, so to speak.
And is there a timescale on that, or is this a case of?
No, there's not. We'll keep you here until we basically process you out. So I'm basically waiting for my termination letter from the university. And this has happened to academics across North America, and I suspect in Britain as well. You have a case already.
Almost certainly, yeah.
You have a case of it's not a COVID case, but Chris Exley, the world's leading expert on aluminum biochemistry, got basically forced to get out of Gale University about a year ago.
What was his crime for the same thing?
His crime was he actually told the truth about aluminum and health, and he ran afoul of two industries. One was the aluminum industry, and the second was the pharmaceutical industry. And that seemed to be too much for Gale University to tolerate. So they made sure he could not receive any money to do research.
So is that what a lot of this comes down to then? Is money? That you would just go, do you know what? The pharmaceutical industry, I'm guessing, kind of funds a lot of these projects, a lot of these, these grants come from them. So actually, we're not going to give you any money if this doctor is employed by you. Is that the way it works?
Basically, the way it works. You're basically messing with their corporate bottom line, and they don't like it. And I understand they don't like it. But the problem is that universities have gone along with it because so much of them, their financial revenues come from that, come from money from the pharma. You've heard the expression regulatory capture, and regulatory capture is where the pharmaceutical industry mostly dictates to the medical establishment what it is and is not good practice, and it certainly dictates to universities. And with regulatory capture, they also get a lot of drugs and a lot of procedures at fire sale prices because universities sell them off quite actively. People like me come up with the discoveries. University, I don't own them. University does. The university sells them to the pharma. That's pretty typical.
So knowing that, you still go and you take part in Uninformed Consent and you speak out. That took real courage to do that.
Well, I don't know if it was courage or stupidity, but at some point you get fed up with what's going on. And at some point, you look in the mirror and say, how am I going to talk to my children today if I don't do the right thing? And the right thing is speaking out about what I think is a massive crime that's been, that humans have been exposed to all over the world. And if you don't speak out now, you're never going to. And that's sort of my bottom line.
Well, I appreciate you speaking out. I'm sure everyone at home appreciates you speaking out as well. Do you think that the people that have committed these crimes will ever be brought to justice? There will ever be a full investigation into what's happened over the last 2 years?
And that's really the question that keeps a lot of us awake. We want the restrictions and the second-class citizenships and the medical experimentation on humans to end, obviously. But the second tier is that we want the people responsible to be brought to justice. Will that happen? I guess it depends how many people demand it. If people are happy just to go back to normal when they release the regulations slightly and say, well, okay, no harm, no foul, we're done, then no. If other voices are heard and where people are saying, look, the actual crimes were committed, this was not just oops, this was malfeasance on a massive level, then I think it should happen. And I hope people will demand that. I think there should be justice for we're talking about in Canada, we're talking about justice for the vaccinated. Think of all the people who've been vaccinated who are having various kinds of health issues now and will always have health issues. So they need justice too, and justice has to be served by holding those accountable.
Absolutely, and I think it's about coming together as well, which is maybe where that kind of whole divide between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, so almost divided society, split people apart on purpose. I can kind of see them coming together a little bit now. I don't know if that's something you've seen as well, but I can see it slightly.
I see it, and I really hope you're right. But I think those who engineered the Great Reset and this pandemic really, the fracturing serves their purposes. This is something that allows them to further an agenda, and the agenda is to break society and to reconstitute society in Klaus Schwab's vision, not in the vision that most of us hold. And fracturing society, fracturing families, fracturing relationships, friendships, even intergenerational relationships, I think accomplishes a purpose because people are isolated and people feel when they're isolated, they don't know what they're going to do and they just go along. And I think that's very much the intent.
Oh, absolutely.
And I've seen it myself. I've seen so many friendships and marriages dissolve over this in the last 3 years, almost 2.5 years.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's where the protests played a part because they brought people together. People kind of found their tribe. And doctors like yourself speaking out has been massively important to people. So we really appreciate that. And we're looking forward to seeing the film when it comes out.
I appreciate that. Yeah. The film is great. I hope you enjoy it. It's really, it takes, the kind of thing I do is I battle, in part of some of the groups I'm with, we battle science for bogus science. In other words, we're always responding to the public health officer here in our in our various provinces in our country. Todd Harris does something very different. Instead of playing whack-a-mole with facts and figures, he basically captures the heart of the issue. Real people are being hurt by these measures and by the restrictions, by the mandates, by the lockdowns, and by the forced vaccination. And that's important to remember. There's real people that are being impacted and suffering. And that's really where I think the film captures the emotions of people, to see that this is not just an academic exercise where I'm debating with our public health officer whether these statistics or that graph are correct or not. So I think Harris has done a remarkable job.
That's great. That's great. And hopefully by looking at that, people will basically never let this happen again. I think that's also something to take away from it.
Ideally, they'll never let it happen again, and they certainly won't let it happen to their children.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.